I'm Mark Ford. I'm 32 years old, and 9 years ago, my own family threw me out onto the street, disowning me for being nothing more than a useless high school graduate. Last month, I stood in a grand, gilded ballroom and watched their carefully constructed world shatter into a million pieces right before their eyes, all because they had absolutely no idea who I had become. Before I tell you how a single announcement from a stage delivered the kind of cold, poetic justice I had long since stopped searching for, do me a favor and drop a comment below letting me know where in the world you're watching from. It's always incredible to see how far these stories can travel. Alright, let's get right into it. The setting for this collision was the annual Blackwell Foundation Charity Gala. Imagine a room straight out of a movie. Ceilings dripping with crystal chandeliers, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and fresh flowers, and the constant, gentle clinking of champagne glasses. It was the kind of place my parents always dreamed of belonging to, a universe of power, influence, and old money they worshipped from the cheap seats. My wife, the brilliant Dr. Emma Blackwell Ford, and I were there as guests of honor. Her family's foundation was the host, and my company, Nutricor Medical, was a major sponsor for the evening's events. I was making my way back from the restroom, straightening a bow tie that still felt foreign to me, when a voice cut through the symphony of polite chatter. It was a voice that shot a current of ice through my veins, a voice I could pick out of a million because it had narrated every single one of my childhood nightmares. "Richard, for God's sake, look." My mother, Diane, hissed to my father, her voice a venomous whisper. "Why is that failure here? My God. He's staining the entire event just by breathing the same air." I felt a familiar, hot flush creep up the back of my neck. My jaw locked tight. For one dizzying second, I wasn't a 32-year-old CEO. I was 17 again, standing frozen in our living room, being told I was a worthless burden. "Just ignore him." My father, Richard, muttered back, his eyes already scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. "He's probably working for the catering company. Don't make a scene." But my younger brother, Lucas, had always loved making a scene, especially when I was the star. He strode towards me, a smug, superior smirk plastered on his perfectly handsome face. He'd always been the golden child, the family's prodigy, while I was the defect, the spare part. Well, look what the cat dragged in," he said, his voice loud enough to make a few nearby heads in designer gowns turn. "Shouldn't you be in the kitchen, big brother? Don't tell me you snuck in to get a free meal." I looked at him, at the impeccably tailored suit he wore, at the arrogant tilt of his head. The raw, choking anger that once would have consumed me was gone. In its place was a strange, cold calm, a stillness I had spent 9 years building. I allowed a small, tight smile to touch my lips. "The world is a small place, Lucas," I said, my voice perfectly even. "And I'm here for a very, very different reason than you are." Just then, 2 more figures joined our tense little circle. One was Lucas's fiancée, a slick-looking surgeon named Dr. Ronald Allen. The other was a stern, powerful-looking woman I immediately recognized as Dr. Patricia Lawson, the formidable chief of medicine at University Hospital and, more importantly, Dr. Allen's direct superior. Dr. Lawson glanced at me with polite, professional curiosity, but Dr. Allen's face went completely white. He looked at me as if he'd just seen a ghost at his own coronation. My father scowled, clearly annoyed by the spectacle Lucas was creating. They had no idea. They stood there, cloaked in their arrogance, judging the boy I was, completely oblivious to the man I am. They didn't know that my company's products were used in Dr. Lawson's hospital. They didn't know that Dr. Allen's career was hanging by a single, invisible thread. A thread I didn't even know I held until that very moment. The announcer's voice, smooth as velvet, boomed through the ballroom, calling Dr. Allen to the stage to receive his Rising Star in Medicine award. My family puffed up with pride, their faces beaming with vicarious glory. They watched their golden boy walk toward the stage, not knowing that he was walking into a trap he couldn't see, and that the world they so desperately wanted to impress was about to witness their spectacular fall from grace. As Ronald Allen took the stage, preening under the spotlight to a polite round of applause, my wife, Emma, materialized by my side. Her presence was a warm, solid anchor in the icy sea of my past. She didn't say a word at first, just slid her hand into mine, her grip firm and reassuring. "Mark, are you okay?" she whispered, her eyes, the color of warm honey, searching mine for any cracks. "We can leave right now. We can walk out that door and never look back. Just say the word." I looked at her, at the fierce loyalty etched onto her beautiful face, a love I once believed I was fundamentally unworthy of. The simple act of her standing there, ready to go to war for me, was enough to extinguish the last flicker of fear in my heart. I squeezed her hand back. "No," I said, my voice quiet but unshakable. "I'm not running anymore. Let's stay." My mother, Diane, must have seen the exchange. She saw this elegant, powerful, beautiful woman standing by my side, and her face, already pinched with disdain, twisted into a new kind of venom. It wasn't enough to insult me. She had to attempt to tear down anything good in my life. "Oh, look, he's managed to find some poor girl to latch onto," she sneered to my father, her voice dripping with a casual cruelty that still had the power to shock me. "He was always defective. Can't do anything for himself." He probably fed her some sob story about his tragic childhood to get her sympathy. Defective. The word struck me with the force of a physical blow. The grand ballroom, the glittering chandeliers, the soft music. It all dissolved into a muted, distant hum. Suddenly, I was 10 years old again, standing on the cold linoleum of our kitchen floor. The shattered pieces of a blue ceramic plate, my mother's favorite, were scattered around my worn-out sneakers. I had been trying to help clear the table after dinner, a rare attempt to earn a sliver of praise. But Lucas had accidentally bumped into me as he ran past, sending the plate crashing to the ground. It was my fault. In our house, it was always my fault. I remember my mother's face. It wasn't contorted with rage. That would have been easier to bear. It was a mask of cold, weary disappointment. She didn't yell. Yelling would have implied I was worth the energy. Instead, she grabbed my arm, her long nails digging into my skinny bicep, and dragged me out the back door to the small, dark storage shed that leaned against our garage. The air inside was thick and suffocating, a cocktail of old paint, gasoline, and damp earth. Spiders had spun thick, dusty webs in the corners. "You'll stay in here and think about what you did," she had said, her voice utterly devoid of emotion. "Maybe a few hours in the dark will fix what's wrong with you. You're just a defective child, Mark." The heavy wooden door slammed shut, plunging me into near-total blackness. I heard the heavy iron bolt slide across on the outside. Locked in, I was left alone in the cloying darkness, the word echoing in the tiny, silent space. Defective. 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 I didn't cry. I had learned by age 10 that tears only made it worse. They were a sign of weakness, another defect. So I just sat on the cold concrete floor, hugging my knees to my chest, trying to make myself as small as possible, as if I could simply will myself to disappear. A sharp, deliberate nudge from Lucas brought me crashing back to the present. He was standing beside my father now, a triumphant sneer on his face. "Still silent, huh? Cat got your tongue? Or is there just nothing going on in that empty head of yours?" My father, Richard, chimed in, his voice a low, dismissive rumble. "What do you expect, Lucas?" The boy barely scraped through high school. A man with no college education has nothing intelligent to contribute to a place like this. He should be grateful they even let him in the door. No college education. And just like that, I was gone again, ripped from the gala and thrown back in time. I was 17, sitting at our polished mahogany dining room table. Hidden beneath the mattress in my bedroom, like forbidden treasures, were 3 college acceptance letters. One of them was from Westfield University, and it came with a partial academic scholarship. I was so proud, so terrified, so ridiculously hopeful. I thought maybe this is it. Maybe this is my ticket out. Maybe this will finally make them see me. I called a family meeting, a term they usually reserved for my punishments. My voice trembled as I laid the letters on the table. My father picked up the one from Westfield, glanced at it with a sneer, and tossed it back down as if it were a piece of junk mail. Partial scholarship? That's an insult. They obviously don't think you're worth much. He didn't even acknowledge the acceptance itself. College? Don't be ridiculous, Mark. We're not wasting a penny on you. You're not smart enough for it. But, Dad, I can work. I can get loans. The scholarship covers almost half. Listen to me. My mother cut in, her tone as sharp and cold as breaking glass. This discussion is over. We will not allow it. You are a high school graduate, and that's all you'll ever be. You will start working full-time the week after graduation, and you will give us your paycheck. You owe us. It is time you started repaying us for the incredible burden of raising someone as unlovely as you. The word hung in the air between us. Unlovely. It was worse than defective. It was a final judgment on my very soul. Lucas, then just a skinny 12-year-old, looked up from his comic book with feigned innocence. I'm going to be a doctor like Dad, he announced to the room. I'll study hard and work for my big brother's share, too. Oh, Lucas, what a wonderful, noble thing to say. My mother cooed, her face melting into a smile as she beamed at him. Yes, you be the success in this family. Let your brother serve as an example of what not to become. My world, which had felt so full of possibility just minutes before, collapsed into dust. The hope I had so carefully hoarded was snuffed out. The next morning, I found my acceptance letters in the kitchen trash, torn neatly in half. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the sounds of my family watching TV together without me, a different feeling began to burn in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was rage. Cold, quiet, calculating rage. I slipped my old, beat-up phone from my nightstand, turned on the voice recorder, and slid it under my bed. If I couldn't fight them out in the open, I would gather my own ammunition in the dark. Even in those suffocating years, there were flickers of light. I remembered my high school science teacher, Mr. Winters, staying after class with me for an hour to talk about my project on nutritional supplements for hospital patients. You have a brilliant, inquisitive mind, Mark, he'd said. His eyes filled with a genuine pride I'd never once seen in my own father's. Don't you ever let anyone convince you otherwise. And there was Dr. Chun, an elderly pediatrician who sometimes worked at my father's clinic. She was quiet, but she saw everything. She saw how they praised Lucas for AB+ while ignoring my straight A's. She couldn't say much without risking her job, but she would find ways to slip me advanced biomedical textbooks. Knowledge is a power they can never take from you, she'd whisper, pressing a book into my hands when no one was looking. Just you wait, Mark. Your time will come. Their faces, their quiet words of encouragement. They were the life raft I clung to in that storm of a house. Back at the gala, Emma's hand tightened on mine. She had heard it all, the sneering whispers, the casual insults. Her beautiful face was a mask of cold fury. I was the one who had lived through it, but she was the one who felt the righteous anger for me now. On stage, Ronald Allen was thanking his mentors. He gave a special, gushing thank you to my father for his guidance and wisdom. My family preened, soaking in the borrowed glory, oblivious. They were on top of their world. I looked at them, then at Emma. The ghosts of the past were no longer just haunting me. They were standing right in front of me, flesh and blood. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. The 3 years after I graduated high school were my wilderness years. They were a blur of grueling work, relentless exhaustion, and closely guarded secrets. My parents had made their decree. I was their personal ATM, their indentured servant. I gave them what they demanded, or rather, I gave them 80% of what I told them I earned. My life became a masterclass in deception. I worked as a pharmacy assistant during the day, where I learned the fundamentals of medication management. At night, I did medical transcription from home, my fingers flying across the keyboard until 2 a.m., learning the language of diagnoses and procedures. On weekends, I worked for a sweet, elderly Japanese woman named Mrs. Yamamoto at her small health food store. She taught me about traditional medicinal ingredients, about the healing power of ginseng and turmeric, about balance and patience. Her quiet wisdom was a balm on my wounded spirit, planting seeds I didn't even know were taking root. From each of these jobs I skimmed. $20 from the pharmacy, $30 from transcription, another $20 from the store. Every week, I would smooth out the crumpled bills and hide them under a loose floorboard beneath my bed. It was a slow, painstaking process, but every dollar I saved felt like a small act of rebellion, another brick in the wall of my future freedom. It was during this time that I discovered my sanctuary, the university library. I couldn't enroll, but I learned that if you walked in with a backpack and a determined look, nobody ever checked for a student ID. I would spend hours there, surrounded by the quiet hum of students and the scent of old paper, devouring medical journals on nutritional biochemistry. I was a ghost in the halls of higher learning. That's where I met Victor Zhang. He was a brilliant, no-nonsense chemistry student who found me one evening hunched over a complex paper on protein synthesis. "I've seen you in here a lot," he said, pulling up a chair. "You're not in any of my classes. What's your story?" I don't know why, but something about his direct, curious gaze made me trust him. I told him everything. The defective label, the college ban, the financial servitude. I expected pity, maybe even a little disgust. Instead, his eyes hardened with anger. "Your parents are fools," he said simply, his voice low but fierce. "They're sitting on a gold mine and treating it like a pile of rocks." Victor became my first real friend, my first true ally. He saw me not as a victim, but as a resource waiting to be tapped. When I was 21, the final, inevitable breaking point came. Lucas, then a spoiled 15-year-old, was preparing for his entrance exams to a prestigious prep school. He was, of course, destined for greatness. One evening, he threw his history textbook across the living room with a dramatic sigh. "I can't study with him here," he whined to our parents, pointing an accusatory finger at me. I was just sitting at the kitchen table, reading one of Dr. Chen's textbooks. His mediocrity is distracting. It's like filling the house with failure. Without a moment's hesitation, my mother turned to me, her face set like stone. "He's right. You need to leave for a while. Go stay with a friend or something. Lucas needs to focus on his future." "I don't have anywhere to go," I said, my voice hollow. "Then figure it out," my father said coldly, not even looking up from his newspaper. "You're a man now. Stop being a burden to this family." They kicked me out that night with nothing but a single backpack of clothes and the $50 I had in my wallet. They expected me to come crawling back within a week, tail between my legs, begging for forgiveness. They expected me to fail spectacularly. What they didn't know was that I had a plan. With the secret money I'd saved over 3 years, and with a crucial assist from my estranged Aunt Sophia, my father's rebellious sister who'd escaped the family's toxicity years ago, acting as my guarantor, I had already signed a lease on a tiny, run-down apartment across town 3 months prior. I didn't crawl back. I vanished from their lives. The first few months were brutal. I was terrified. The silence in my tiny apartment was so loud it was almost deafening. I worked all 3 jobs, sleeping maybe 4 hours a night, living on instant ramen and cheap coffee. But I was free. Every meal I bought, every bill I paid was a declaration of my independence. A week after I left, I got a call that changed my life. It was from Dr. James Wilson, a respected physician who used to consult at my father's clinic. He'd always been kind, and like Dr. Chun, he'd seen the ugly dynamic in our family. "I heard what happened, Mark," he said, his voice gruff but kind. "Your parents are prize-winning idiots. I have a position open for a research assistant at my lab. It's not glamorous work. You'll be cleaning beakers and running data, but it's a start. I value talent, not pedigree. The job is yours if you want it." That job was my lifeline. Dr. Wilson became my mentor. He saw my hunger to learn and my relentless work ethic. He let me use the lab after hours to run my own experiments. On my first day, he gave me a seemingly impossible task: to collate and analyze a mountain of messy, disorganized data from a failed experiment. He expected it to take me a week. I stayed up for 2 straight nights, fueled by coffee and determination, and handed him a comprehensive, color-coded report in 36 hours. He just grunted, but I saw a flicker of respect in his eyes. He wrote a recommendation letter that, along with my savings and Victor's help navigating the labyrinth of application forms, got me into Westfield University. I was officially a college student. It was a grind. I was older than the other students and I felt like an imposter. While they were going to parties, I was in the lab. While their parents paid their tuition, I was working nights to afford my own. But I was driven by a fire they couldn't possibly understand. I wasn't just studying for a degree. I was forging a new identity. It was in my sophomore year that I met Emma. She was a brilliant medical student 5 years my senior, a resident who was guest lecturing in one of my advanced biology classes. She was smart, compassionate, and she saw something in me beyond the tired, overworked student. We connected over a shared passion for innovative medical solutions. I remember our first real conversation in a campus coffee shop. I was sketching out an idea for a nutrient formula that could accelerate tissue regeneration. She didn't just listen. She challenged me, questioned my assumptions, and then added 3 brilliant ideas of her own. When I eventually summoned the courage to tell her my story, she didn't flinch. Most people would be broken by that, Mark, she told me, her eyes full of a fierce admiration that humbled me. But you've turned all that pain into purpose. Her belief in me was the final piece of the puzzle. With Emma's encouragement and Victor's partnership, I took the research I'd been working on and developed a revolutionary line of medical nutrition products. NutriCore Medical was born not in a fancy boardroom, but in my cramped apartment kitchen, with Victor and me arguing over chemical compounds until sunrise. I remember this part with a bitter clarity. To get our product off the ground, we had to pitch it to hospitals for clinical trials. We got a meeting with the Research and Development Committee at University Hospital. We were nervous, but we knew our science was solid. We presented our data, our projections, our passion. One of the doctors on that committee was particularly dismissive. He was young, arrogant, and radiated an aura of entitlement. He leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen on the table, and shot down our proposal with a condescending smirk. "This is derivative at best, gentlemen," he said, lacking in any real clinical potential. His name was Dr. Ronald Allen. Months later, we heard through a colleague that he had tried to get funding for a suspiciously similar, but scientifically inferior product. The attempt failed, but it told me everything I needed to know about his character. He was a thief in a white coat. We eventually secured funding from other sources, including Blackwell General. By the time I graduated with my master's degree, Victor and I were the co-founders of a rapidly growing company. My success wasn't a lucky break. It was forged in fire over 9 long years. One night, while organizing my digital files, I stumbled upon a cloud backup from my first broken laptop. In a folder of old emails, I found it. An email from Lucas to a friend, sent years ago, back when I still held out a sliver of hope that we could be brothers. He was bragging. "Easiest $500 I ever spent to have that nerd take my SATs for me," he'd written. "Dad will never know. I'm golden." At the time, finding that would have destroyed me. Now it was just data, a digital ghost, a piece of evidence I never knew I had. Emma and I got married a year after I finished my degree. Her parents, Jonathan and Margaret Blackwell, were initially wary, but they judged me on my character, not my family tree. And in them, I found the loving, supportive parents I never had. Our son, Oliver, was born a year later. My life was full. My past was a locked room, and I had thrown away the key. I thought I had left them all behind for good. I was wrong. Back at the gala, the polite applause for Ronald Allen died down. He walked off the stage, clutching his glass award like a holy relic, and made a beeline for our table. My family trailed behind him like an honor guard, their faces alight with triumph. They were coming to gloat, to rub their victory in the face of the family failure. "So," Lucas began, his eyes flicking condescendingly between me and Emma, "this is your date for the evening?" I'm surprised you could even afford a ticket to get in here, let alone buy one for her. Must have cost you a month's salary." Before I could formulate a response, Emma extended a graceful hand. She didn't offer it to Lucas, but to his fiancée. "Dr. Allen," she said, her voice cool and steady as a surgeon's hand. "Emma Blackwell Ford. It's a pleasure to finally meet you." The name Blackwell hung in the air like a charged particle. I saw a flicker of confusion in my mother's eyes, a momentary processing error in her mental calculus. But she was too caught up in her own narrative to let it register. "Well, Dr. Allen here just won a very prestigious award," my father announced, puffing out his chest so far I thought a button might pop. "He's one of the most promising young surgeons in the country. A true success. A credit to his family. Unlike some people I could mention." His eyes, cold and dismissive, bored into me. I didn't rise to the bait. I just nodded slowly, my gaze fixed on Allen. "Yes," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "I'm very familiar with Dr. Allen's work. We've crossed paths before." A wave of visible unease washed over Allen's handsome face. His smile tightened. He knew exactly what I was talking about. He remembered me from that committee meeting years ago. He remembered his casual dismissal, his professional arrogance. He remembered trying to steal my idea. The hunter was suddenly realizing he might be the prey. This wasn't the triumphant moment he had envisioned. The gala's host, a man with a booming, theatrical voice, returned to the microphone. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, for our keynote address and the presentation of the Blackwell Foundation's Visionary in Medicine Award." The atmosphere in the room shifted. This was the main event. This was the award that truly mattered, the one that came with a massive research grant and the weight of the Blackwell name. Emma leaned in close, her breath warm against my ear. "You know who's giving the keynote address and presenting the award, right?" she whispered, a hint of mischief dancing in her eyes. "It's Dad, of course. Dr. Jonathan Blackwell, my father-in-law, the patriarch of the Blackwell medical empire, was about to take the stage. The personal, private tension at our table was about to go very, very public. The stakes of the evening had just been raised exponentially. I let my eyes drift across the opulent ballroom, a sea of tuxedos and sequins. My gaze landed on a table not far from the stage. Sitting there, looking elegant and composed in a deep blue gown, was Dr. Chun. Our eyes met across the crowded room for a fraction of a second, and she gave me the slightest, most subtle nod. It was a quiet message of support that spanned 2 decades. A witness from the very beginning was here to see the end. It felt fated, like every piece of my life, the good, the bad, and the ugly, was converging in this one room, at this one moment. The house lights dimmed. A single, powerful spotlight hit the podium. And Dr. Jonathan Blackwell, a man of immense integrity, a man whose respect I had earned, a man I was proud to call my family, walked onto the stage. "Good evening," he began, his voice calm and commanding, effortlessly silencing the chatter of 1,000 people. "Tonight, we celebrate the future of medicine. We celebrate those who innovate, those who persevere, and those who hold themselves to the highest standards of integrity." My parents and Lucas were watching him, completely captivated. They were in awe of this man, this living symbol of the world they so desperately admired. They were hanging on his every word, having no idea that those words were about to bring their own world crashing down around them. Jonathan spoke eloquently about the challenges in modern healthcare, the desperate need for new, disruptive solutions. "True innovation," he said, his eyes sweeping the room with a practiced, thoughtful gaze, "often comes not from the comfort of the established, but from the crucible of adversity. It comes from those who have had to fight for every inch of ground they stand on, from those who see problems differently because they've lived them from the inside out." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Tonight, our foundation wants to honor a company and a man who embodies that very spirit. A man whose personal journey of resilience is as remarkable as his professional achievements." I could feel my own heart pounding in my chest, a steady, heavy drumbeat. This was it, the moment of reckoning. His company has single-handedly revolutionized post-operative recovery, Jonathan continued, and is fundamentally changing how we approach patient nutrition, saving countless lives in our own hospitals and in medical centers across the country. I saw Dr. Lawson, Alan's boss, lean forward, her expression sharp and intrigued. My family was still blissfully oblivious, looking around the room, whispering amongst themselves, wondering which famous CEO or research pioneer was about to be honored. They never, in a million years, would have thought it could be me. The possibility didn't even exist in their universe. Jonathan Blackwell smiled. It was the same warm, genuine smile he gave me the first time I had dinner at his home. The smile that told me I was finally welcome. It gives me immense personal and professional pride to honor our foundation's most important partner, a true visionary leader, and a man I am privileged to call my son-in-law. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the CEO and founder of NutriCore Medical, Mr. Mark Ford. The name hit the room like a physical force. Mark Ford. For one long suspended moment, there was absolute ringing silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Then the powerful spotlight swung from the stage, a brilliant white beam that cut through the darkness of the ballroom and landed, with pinpoint accuracy, directly on our table. On me. Emma and I stood up in unison. The applause started, tentative at first, a scattered pattering of hands from those who knew me. Then, as 1,000 heads turned in our direction, it grew into a powerful rolling wave of sound. The giant screens on either side of the stage, which had been showing the Blackwell Foundation logo, now showed a live, high-definition feed of my face. My calm, impassive face. There was nowhere for my family to hide. I wish I could have bottled the look on their faces in that single, eternal second. It was a symphony of destruction. My father, Richard, looked as if he'd been physically struck by a fist. His jaw dropped open, his face a mask of slack, utter disbelief that quickly curdled into a dark, mottled red of impotent rage. He looked from me to the stage and back again, his mind refusing to process the reality it was being shown. My mother, Diane, went a ghostly shade of white. Her eyes, wide with horrified comprehension, darted from me to Emma. The name Emma had uttered earlier, Blackwell Ford, finally detonated in her brain. This wasn't some poor girl I'd tricked. This was the heiress to the Blackwell fortune. And I wasn't a failure. I was her husband. But it was Lucas. Lucas's face was the true masterpiece of ruin. The smug, arrogant smirk he wore as a second skin vanished, instantly replaced by a ghastly, green-tinged shock. It was the primal look of a man watching his entire reality, his entire sense of self-worth and superiority, being systematically dismantled and rewritten before his very eyes. Dr. Allen looked like he was going to be physically ill. His Rising Star Award, sitting on the table in front of him, now seemed like a cruel joke, a cheap tin trophy. He sank back in his chair, suddenly looking very small in his expensive suit. As Emma and I made our way towards the stage, walking the long path between tables, I didn't look at them. I didn't have to. I could feel the searing heat of their collective shock and humiliation. It was like walking through a fire that couldn't touch me. I reached the stage, shook my father-in-law's hand, and accepted the heavy, beautifully cut glass award. I stepped up to the microphone, my heart hammering against my ribs, but my voice, when it came out, was as calm and steady as a frozen lake. "Thank you, Jonathan," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. "Thank you to the Blackwell Foundation. It is a profound honor to be here tonight." I kept my remarks brief and to the point. I thanked my incredible team, my brilliant partner Victor, who was sitting at a nearby table and giving me a huge, beaming grin. And most of all, I thanked my wife. "To my wife, Emma," I said, turning to look at her as she stood by the side of the stage. "The heart of my life, the rock of our family, and the brilliant mind that challenges and inspires me every single day. None of this would be possible without you." After the applause died down, Jonathan, as was the custom at the gala, announced a short, informal Q&A session. A sharp-looking journalist from a major medical trade publication was the first to raise her hand. "Mr. Ford, congratulations. Your company's rise has been nothing short of meteoric. What would you say was the single biggest challenge you faced in getting your innovative, and some might say disruptive ideas accepted by the established medical community? This was my moment, the opening I had been given. I looked out across the audience, letting my gaze deliberately sweep past the table where Dr. Allen sat, frozen, next to his boss, Dr. Lawson. That's an excellent question. I began, my tone thoughtful. I think the biggest challenge, surprisingly, wasn't the science. The science was sound, the data was there. The biggest challenge was overcoming institutional inertia. It's pushing past the gatekeepers, people who are often more interested in protecting their own small territory than in embracing genuine progress. I let that sink in for a moment before continuing. It's the challenge of presenting a novel idea to a committee, an idea you've poured your life into, only to have it dismissed out of hand as derivative or lacking potential by someone who hasn't done a fraction of the research. And the greatest challenge of all. I paused, locking eyes with Dr. Allen across the room. Is learning that the same person who publicly dismissed your work was privately trying to get funding for a watered-down, inferior version of your own concept behind your back. A shocked murmur rippled through the crowd. I saw Dr. Lawson's eyes narrow into dangerous slits, her sharp gaze flicking from me to a now profusely sweating Ronald Allen. I hadn't used his name, but in that room, in that context, I didn't need to. I had just painted a giant, unmissable target on his back, and his own boss was holding the bow. It was too much for Lucas. It was a complete system overload. Seeing me, his defective older brother, being celebrated as a visionary while his own fiancée was being publicly and gracefully exposed as a charlatan, broke the last thread of his sanity. He shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the polished floor, the sound echoing in the tense hall. "Lies!" he shrieked, his voice cracking with pubescent-like fury. "He's a fraud. Don't listen to him. He's a liar who barely even graduated high school." The room fell into another stunned, disbelieving hush. All eyes swiveled to my brother, this unhinged man screaming like a madman in the middle of a black-tie charity gala. 2 large security guards started moving purposefully towards him. But my father-in-law, Jonathan Blackwell, simply held up a hand, a gesture of calm, absolute power that stopped them in their tracks. He leaned back into the microphone, his expression one of mild, almost bored disappointment. "For the record," he said, his voice amplified throughout the entire ballroom, a voice of pure, lethal authority. "Mr. Mark Ford holds a Master of Science degree in nutritional science with highest honors from Westfield University. He currently sits on the advisory board for their graduate program. I'm not sure which Mark Ford you're referring to, young man, but it clearly is not this one. It was a public execution. Clean, swift, and utterly devastatingly final." Lucas stood there, frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish, no sound coming out. My mother was frantically trying to pull him down into his seat, her face buried in her hands in shame. My father just stared blankly into the middle distance, looking like a man who had aged 20 years in 20 seconds. I looked at them one last time from the stage, from this elevated platform of success and respect. There was no joy in my heart. There was no feeling of triumphant revenge. There was just a vast, empty, quiet. The lifelong battle I had been fighting, the desperate, clawing struggle to prove I was worthy, was finally, definitively over. And I had won. I concluded my time on stage with a polite but firm, "Thank you," and walked back to my seat, the heavy glass award feeling solid and real in my hand. The applause was thunderous this time, a genuine, rolling ovation from a room that now understood the full scope of the drama they had just witnessed. As I navigated my way back, I saw the final act of my family's tragedy play out. They were in a state of chaotic, panicked retreat. It was a study in humiliation. Lucas, his face a blotchy, tear-streaked mess, was being half-dragged, half-pushed towards a side exit by my mother. In their haste, my father bumped into a small table, sending a champagne flute crashing to the floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the now quieting room. He didn't even look back. They were a disorderly rout, fleeing a battlefield where they had been utterly vanquished. The stares and whispers of the city's elite followed them like a trail of smoke. But the real drama, the career-ending denouement, was happening at their table. Dr. Patricia Lawson was standing over Ronald Allen, who remained seated, looking up at her like a schoolboy awaiting his sentence. Her arms were crossed. Her face was like granite. She was a woman used to power, and she was not pleased. "Ronald," she said, her voice low and carrying, so cold it could have frozen water. "Don't bother coming into the hospital tomorrow, or ever again. Just have your office cleared out by noon. Send your lawyer my regards." She turned on her heel and walked away without another word. Allen just stared after her, his face ashen. He looked down at the Rising Star award on the table as if it were a venomous snake. His career, which had been his entire identity, was over. He had hitched his wagon to the wrong family and been exposed as a fraud in the most public way imaginable. Emma and I didn't stay much longer. We graciously accepted the congratulations from colleagues and friends, but the energy of the event had been irrevocably altered. We were now the center of a swirling storm of gossip. "Shall we go?" Emma asked quietly, and I nodded, grateful. We left the ballroom, stepping out of the charged atmosphere and into the relative quiet of the Grand Hotel lobby. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation, that had sharpened my wits and steadied my voice, was starting to fade, leaving a hollow, throbbing ache in its place. We didn't speak during the elevator ride down to the parking garage. We didn't speak as we got into the car. The silence was absolute, a space for everything that had just happened to settle. As we drove, the city lights of the downtown skyline blurred past the window, brilliant streaks of gold and red in the velvet darkness. I just stared out, not really seeing any of it. The war was over. The ghosts had been exorcised. I should have felt victorious. I should have been celebrating. But I just felt tired. A deep, bone-deep weariness that seemed to settle into my very soul. I didn't even realize I was crying until I felt Emma's hand on my cheek, her thumb gently wiping away a single, hot tear. I hadn't felt it fall. It wasn't a sob. It wasn't a breakdown. It was just a silent drop of water, a final, quiet release of 32 years of accumulated pain, of feeling unworthy, of fighting just to be seen. It was the full stop at the end of a very long, very painful sentence. Emma didn't say anything. She didn't offer platitudes or try to cheer me up. She just took her hand from my cheek, moved to the center console, and interlaced her fingers with mine, holding on tight. She knew I didn't need words. I just needed to know that I wasn't alone in the silence. And I wasn't. Not anymore. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was swift and brutal, relayed to us through the medical community grapevine, which is faster and more vicious than any tabloid. Dr. Allen was, as promised, fired. The investigation triggered by my comment at the gala quickly uncovered not just his attempt at intellectual property theft, but a disturbing pattern of exaggerating diagnoses to push for unnecessary, expensive procedures on vulnerable patients. His medical license was suspended, pending a full board review. His rising star had plummeted to earth. My family's clinic, which had already been struggling financially, imploded. The story of what happened at the gala spread like wildfire. Nobody wants to take their child to a pediatrician who treats his own son like garbage. Patients left in droves. Desperate, they were forced to sell the practice for a fraction of its worth just to cover their mounting debts. My father, who had built his entire identity around being Dr. Ford, was forced into an early, ignominious retirement. Lucas, as we heard from a somber phone call with Aunt Sophia, completely fell apart. After his engagement to Alan was spectacularly destroyed, he tried desperately to prove he could do better than me. He began a reckless affair with the wife of a powerful hospital board member, a desperate gambit for status and money. It backfired catastrophically. The husband found out, and the resulting scandal made Lucas a social and professional pariah. Desperate and broke, he turned to our parents for help, but they, in a final act of breathtaking, ironic cruelty, disowned him. He was no longer their golden child. He was now just another family disgrace. They had finally found a failure bigger than me, and they cast him out just as they had cast me out. The cycle was complete. A year can change everything. It can turn a battlefield into a garden. A year after that night at the gala, I stood on another stage, under another warm, bright spotlight. This time I was at Westfield University, my alma mater. I wasn't there to receive an award. I was there to give the commencement address. Looking out at the sea of thousands of young, hopeful faces in their identical caps and gowns, I felt a sense of profound peace that I had never known before. My company was thriving, but more than that, it was innovating. We had just launched a new pediatric nutritional line, designed specifically for children with chronic illnesses, a project that was deeply personal to me. My son, Oliver, was a happy, healthy, rambunctious 5-year-old, full of laughter and endless, mischievous questions. My life was no longer defined by the darkness I had escaped, but by the light I was now building. I didn't talk about my family in my speech. I didn't need to name them to tell my story. I talked about resilience. I talked about the difference between your circumstances and your character. I talked about how your value is not determined by the people who refuse to see it. Your worth, I told them, my voice carrying over the silent stadium, is not a reflection you see in someone else's broken mirror. It is a fire you build inside yourself, log by painful log, a fire that gives you warmth when the world is cold. A fire they can never, ever extinguish. The ghosts of my past still surfaced from time to time, but they were no longer menacing specters that haunted my dreams. They were more like distant, pathetic echoes from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Aunt Sophia, who had become a beloved honorary grandmother to Oliver, would occasionally pass on news during our weekly phone calls. "Heard from a cousin back home," she told me one Sunday. "Your father and mother sold the house. Moved to a small retirement community in a little town in Arizona. No one knows them there. He doesn't go by Dr. Ford anymore. Just Richard." They were no longer the influential local doctor and his wife, just an anonymous, bitter, retired couple with fading memories and a legacy of ruin. "And Lucas?" I asked, almost hesitant to hear. "Last anyone heard," Sophia said, her voice softer now, "he's working as a bartender. His health isn't good. He's bouncing between cheap apartments. Looks a lot older than he is." He was living the exact life of failure and mediocrity they had always projected onto me. The most telling piece of news, however, the piece that finally closed the book for me, came in a long, handwritten letter from Dr. Chun. She had retired to a sunny condo in Florida, but we kept in touch, sending letters back and forth like people from another era. She wrote that she had run into my mother at a grocery store during a brief visit back to our old hometown. She described my mother as looking old, tired, and defeated. After some awkward small talk, my mother, completely unprompted, had started talking about her sons. Her voice, Dr. Chun wrote, was thick with a strange, curdled mix of anger and self-pity. "I just can't believe it," my mother had confessed, her eyes welling up with tears. "All those years, all that money, all that hope we poured into Lucas. He was supposed to be the one. And it was Mark who had it in him all along. We backed the wrong horse, Eleanor. We backed the wrong damned horse." Dr. Chun wrote that my mother actually cried. But as she described it, I understood with chilling clarity that they weren't tears of remorse for the years of cruelty and abuse. They weren't tears of regret for the little boy she had locked in a shed. They were the bitter tears of a gambler who had lost a fortune. She wasn't sorry for the pain she had caused me. She was sorry she had missed out on the prestige and money my success could have brought her. Reading that letter, I felt a great, final weight lift from my shoulders. I wasn't angry. I didn't feel a shred of triumph. I just felt a profound, final sense of closure. They would never change. They would never understand. And it no longer mattered. Their opinion of me was a currency that had lost all its value. My own family, the one I had built with Emma, was my entire world. The Blackwells had become the loving, supportive parents I always deserved. My father-in-law, Jonathan, was my mentor and one of my closest friends. My mother-in-law, Margaret, was the kind, doting grandmother Oliver adored. She'd often look at me during our loud, chaotic family dinners, a fierce pride in her eyes, and say, "You are a testament, Mark, a testament to the fact that the family you choose is the one that truly defines you." My partner, Victor, was more than a co-founder. He was Uncle Vic, the one who taught Oliver how to build ridiculously complex Lego creations. He, Aunt Sophia, and Dr. Chun were regulars at our Thanksgiving table. We were a patchwork family, stitched together not by blood, but by love, loyalty, and a shared, unspoken understanding of what it meant to build a life on your own terms. One evening, months after I'd received Dr. Chen's letter, I was in my home office, reviewing some quarterly reports. Emma came in and wrapped her arms around my shoulders from behind, resting her chin on my head as she looked at the spreadsheets on the screen. "What are you thinking about so hard?" she asked softly. "About that night," I admitted, closing the laptop. "About them." She was quiet for a moment. "Do you ever feel sorry for them?" I thought about it for a long, honest moment. I thought about the cold storage shed, the torn-up acceptance letters, the years of being called worthless. I thought about my mother's bitter tears of regret. "No," I said finally, turning in my chair to look up at my incredible wife. "I don't feel sorry for them, but I don't hate them anymore, either. Honestly, I just don't think about them much at all." And that, I realized, was the ultimate victory. Not the public takedown, not their downfall. It was my own hard-won indifference. It was the quiet, settled peace that comes from knowing, deep in your bones, that they no longer had any power over me. They were just people I used to know. Tonight, as I'm telling you all this, my house is quiet, the comforting silence of a safe and happy home. Emma is reading in the living room, a cup of tea steaming beside her, and the only sound is the gentle, rhythmic hum of the refrigerator. A few minutes ago, I was doing my favorite part of the day, tucking Oliver into bed. He's at that age where the questions are getting bigger, more complicated, and sometimes they hit you right in the heart. He was looking at a framed photo on his nightstand. It was from our last family vacation to the coast, me, Emma, and him on a sunny beach, with Jonathan and Margaret, my in-laws, laughing in the background as they tried to build a sandcastle. "Dad," he asked, his voice soft and sleepy, "why don't we see your other grandma and grandpa? The ones you told me about before?" I sat on the edge of his superhero-themed bed, the faint light from the hallway casting long, gentle shadows across his room. How do you explain a lifetime of pain to a 5-year-old who has only ever known unconditional love? How do you explain a darkness you've worked so hard to keep from ever touching his world? I chose my words with care, wanting to give him the truth without the trauma. "Well, buddy," I began, smoothing his messy brown hair back from his forehead. "Sometimes people, even people who are supposed to be family, can get a little lost. They forget how to be kind. They forget how to see the good and special things in people, even when they're standing right in front of them." He looked at me, his big, brown eyes, so much like Emma's, full of innocent confusion. "But why? Why didn't they see the good things in you, Dad?" I felt that familiar lump form in my throat, but this time, it wasn't one of sadness or anger. It was one of overwhelming, bone-deep love for this little boy, for the incredible, safe life I was now able to give him. You know, for a very long time, that question really bothered me. I told him honestly. But then I learned something very important. It doesn't really matter why some people don't see your value, Oliver. It doesn't make you any less valuable. The only thing that truly matters is that you know your own worth, deep down inside, and that you spend your life building a family, a circle of friends who see it too, people who lift you up and remind you of it every single day, like Grandma Margaret and Grandpa Jonathan, like Uncle Victor, like Mommy. I leaned down and kissed his forehead. "And like you remind me of what's important every single day, kiddo." He smiled, a sleepy, contented grin, his eyes starting to droop. "I love you, Dad. I love you more, buddy," I whispered. "To the moon and back." I stayed there for a minute after he drifted off to sleep, just watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest. I looked around his room, at the colorful, chaotic drawings taped to the wall, the mess of superhero toys on the floor, the framed photo of our laughing, loving family on his nightstand. This was my legacy. Not the company, not the awards, not the perfectly executed revenge at a fancy gala. This little boy, sleeping peacefully in a home filled with warmth and unwavering love. This was the life I had built, not from the ashes of my past, but from the solid foundation of my own hard-won self-worth. It was the ultimate answer to their every insult, the final, quiet, and most meaningful triumph. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to prove your worth to people who should have seen it all along? Please, share your own stories in the comments below. I read them all. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Take care.